Heyo, my Planet friends, Johnny5 Alive here, and welcome back to our Let's Build. We are doing Project Red Promise, and what I have for you guys here today is a different aspect to the build, some key features or key components that help actually make the build what it is, and that is going to be our hydroponics. If we're going to make a fully functioning Mars base that is self-sustaining, we need a hydroponic system. So we have some reference images. I'll bring them up on screen here. And there are three types of hydroponics that I took inspiration from. Copy with taste, but in this case, it's more of a copy as close as possible because I liked what I saw. So these images come from the Lunar Space Colony map from Overwatch, which is Winston's sort of home base where he grew up, and he was fully self-sustained on the moon. So they made a whole map for this character, and we don't have a map for Juno, which this Mars base is inspired or based off of. However, if we just look at what they did for Lunar Space Colony, we can copy with taste. And for the most part, I want to take elements of them just the way they are, exactly the way they are, reuse them, repurpose them, but integrate and use them in my own way. So there will be like I don't know, like a 60 to 70% likeliness, you know, they'll look similar. I mean, I would say like the silhouette and the feel, the likeliness of the feel and shape and look of it will be pretty like spot on, like 80% likeliness, I guess. However, the smaller details and the actual functionality is much different. It's much more Planko-fied, right? We are limited with the tools that we have in the game, but as long as we hit the silhouette and its functionality, we should have success. So they are different, much different. So, and I knew just using the pieces in Planet Coaster alone is going to make it different. So having that as a direct reference is fine. And I recommend that to everybody building something. You know, we can't all just invent crazy contraptions out of our heads. I mean, some people are creative that way, but it's always good to have references. So those are things that when I looked around the map for Lunar Space Colony for the moon, for Winston, there were certain elements that I said, this is going to be something I definitely want to include in my build. And that was the rover bay, the hydroponics, and from Gibraltar, which is the base of operations for the Overwatch team. There were a few little Easter eggs and things like the Winston suit hanging from the ceiling that I definitely wanted to bring in as an Easter egg or a nod to Winston, because a lot of my inspiration came from Winston's map. So better to have the character suit somewhere in my build. So with that being said, that's what we're doing here today. We're coming up with, you know, we're trying to recreate our reference images in a Planko-friendly way. So that is creating a select few of the hydroponics that I felt that were replicatable in Planet Coaster that I also thought would work well with my build. They had a lot of different ones. They had some smaller ones, some more like table style ones. Like they had certain ones that just probably wouldn't have worked as well, or could have worked, but maybe I would have had to like build more more space for. You got to remember the reference images that I'm taking when I explored the Lunar Space Colony map from Overwatch when I was getting my inspiration and running around. It's an entire map. 2 spawn points, battle area, multiple capture points. It's King of the Hill with 3 different locations, right? So it's a massive map. And in the scale of things in comparison to what I'm building is essentially could be chalked up to the size of one of the spawn points in terms of like scale and that sort of thing. So I'm not building an entire lunar colony. I wouldn't be able to do that with 8,000 pieces. I would need to make a small park file. So That being said, I can't do every little thing I see because I'm going to have to make more room for it. And building something means you have to find a place for it. And then, you know, are you just designing stuff for the sake of designing stuff? And then you build something and now you have to find a place for it. It becomes a bit of a hot mess. This I struggled with because it wasn't exactly centered. I think I paused the recording and then figured it out off screen, but it's about building a cylinder that has a snap center point and then F-snapping everything to it and then putting it on a rotator and snap F-ing to that. It was a bit of a nightmare, but we got it to work. The idea there is I want the bits to rotate and then the actual platform to rotate in the opposite direction, and we did manage that. So we'll show the actual finished builds once we're done the speed build in-game, and we'll go show you how that looks. You can see one in the top left-hand corner right now. It's spinning around and doing its thing. So we got the small tank working. Now we got to do the bigger tank, which is a lot more complicated and has some very interesting nuances to it. So again, to what I was just saying is there are a lot of neat things, computers and glass tables with plants in the glass tables that I thought would have been really cool, but the more glass tables I do, the more floor space I'm going to have to do. So some of those things I put it on the maybe list and was like, I'll build it if I have room for it later. And then when I got to putting these tanks in and finding out where they go and building my whole hydroponics lab, to my surprise, I filled up the whole space to a point where I even had plans for more potato crops and I couldn't even fit those in. So it's a good thing I didn't overbuild too many small doodads. And I mentioned this before, it's about like the reason I'm pausing my build and I'm not actually building my building right now, and I'm stopping to build these vehicles, to build this character, to now build these hydroponics. What you're seeing between today's episode and the last two are basically extras that are taking me away from actually building the build, the actual building itself. But I find it important to do these things because they are going to dictate how the building goes. If these hydroponic tanks, if I want to make put two of them in and four of the small ones, or however I decide to lay them out, I need to see how they look, you know, in form, like completed. I can't just hope that I'm going to build it to that size. I have to see what, like those doors that I use for the bottoms and tops, they're not scalable. The next upcoming update said you can now scale animated objects, so you would be able to scale them, but not right now. At this time of me building this build, cannot scale those pieces. So the tanks, I could use a different piece, but these tanks are supposed to be pretty big. So based off of how big that is, I can get an idea on how much space it's going to take up. Am I going to have one of them? Two of them? We'll see. So I have to build one to see how does it actually fit into my space. And when we figure that out, we are going to know if we need to make the room bigger or smaller. Therefore, the building is the design of it, the shape of it, the size of it is dictated off of the props that we build, the extras that we build. So that's why I've taken this side quest to build all these things and, you know, take that energy, that focus, and that time away from actually constructing the build. Because if I don't figure this out, it's actually going to just cause me more problems later on. I might have to smash a wall down, rebuild something, or rethink my space. And now you're working backwards. So here we are. I'm putting a tank in, thinking like, how does it fit? And based off the reference image that I had, this needs to be kind of too wide and connected in the middle. So we're going to build it the way we see it and then find how that fits into our space afterwards. So the core components here are this tank, the smaller tank, and then the other tank that we do in this video here today actually came a little bit later on after I kind of built the structure up, because I sort of forgot about it. In my reference images, I had this idea in mind where I was like, I'm going to use this one, this one, and this one. And then I didn't build the last one. And I knew at the time, because they're hydroponics that go into the wall. They're kind of like shelves or drawers that slide into the wall. And I figured, well, as long as I have walls, I can figure out that later. So I put it on the back burner thinking like, I don't need to build it now, because when the walls go up, we'll decide then which walls they go on. And when the walls go up, I will, oh yeah, I remember I wanted to do those wall tanks. Let's go build those. So what you'll see here, you might see a spoiler in this video, I'm not entirely sure, but it's a good chance that the next tank that we build, which are the wall tanks, you'll see a somewhat more evolved build off to the side in the background, but you won't see you won't see every aspect of it. And all of that stuff that we'll be building will be in tomorrow's video anyways. So in tomorrow's video, we're going to be building most of the building, and then it'll jump cut to having those tanks that we built today done. And that at that point, that's where I stopped to go make those tanks. And then we build the rest of the build with those tanks in mind. And then we start, finishing up our build. So for the most part, everything is a building block layered on top of each other. I'm building things with purpose, with intent to help me build my build without having to work backwards and rethink things later on when stuff doesn't fit. And these are pretty big. They're pretty big. So knowing how, they take up like a 16th of that room. I mean, just one of these tanks. It takes up a big chunk. I mean, maybe even more than that, like a 10th of the room. It's a big thing. And if I had many of them, it'd be very claustrophobic. So I did end up going with just the one, but it is a key feature. It's a focal point. It's a centerpiece, if you will. When you enter the room, it is very much up against the wall and in the center, and it has pipes going into it and all sorts of cool stuff, and it draws your attention to it. I don't think there's any need for multiples of them because it's so big and it grows so many crops that one is more than enough. So just building that one was definitely worth it. So now we're jumping ahead to the wall. So we'll take a look at that tank that's finished in a second when we're done this one. And then we're doing this wall thing now. Now, to my last video when I'm talking about Juno and the little challenges that I came across the way and building the Winston character that I do later on off camera and some of the little projects I do, and building her gun with the 150 version versus the 40-piece version, and the small version versus the big version. You learn a lot doing things big and small, and then making my Winston suit with like 50 pieces or less, how to be efficient with your pieces. And when I was building this, I wasn't thinking about efficiency, and I just was thinking about functionality and the look. I wanted to nail that square but roundish look, right? And that's what you see with those rounded corners, which means we have to smash basic shapes into basic shapes, and that's a lot of pieces. And it doesn't seem like a lot of pieces at first. You're like rectangle here, but then they're not the same length, and then I have to duplicate another one and stretch it over, and then now you need a lid for that, and then you need it adds up. It starts adding up real quick. What could have technically just been a rectangle, which could have been sufficient, and another rectangle that comes out of that could have been okay. But those little details do make it pop, right? It does add that little extra bit of detail, that wow factor. And for what's something I would consider to be a main presence in my hydroponics room. So this is like a key component. It's going to take up probably 1/4 of my space in there, potentially. It's a main key feature to what we're building. So it should look good. However, I'm starting adding all these little details in, trying to make it make sense. And then you make one of them and it works, and then you duplicate it 6 times, and suddenly you have like 800 pieces. And 800 pieces, when you have an 8,000 piece build, is 1/10 of your build. 10% of my build gone by having these. However, I'll make the argument that these are a key component. What is it that my restaurant base thing is like? What are the selling features of it? It's self-sustaining. And how is it self-sustaining? Through hydroponics and all of that, and lab work. So this is probably 1/4 of the lab in terms of components and interesting things to look at. And it stands out a lot. So I'd say, like, as much as it is a restaurant, it's also a self-sustaining base. So this is actually probably worth that 10%. Might be a little over budget. It's a little over budget. And that's where I was kind of saying that I could probably find a way to do this cheaper and still not have it look cheap, if that makes sense. It doesn't need all these smooth edges. Maybe I could have come up with something different, used a different piece, or found a way to make up for the details elsewhere by just putting a piece of trim over the hard edge of a square and that sort of thing. Maybe I could have simplified the amount of plants inside of them or something like that. But it is what it is, and the cost that it costed, we still had enough pieces to do pretty much everything we wanted with this build. I will say, by the time I got to the end of the build, I was at 8,000 pieces, and I was adding more and then finding things to delete to keep what I so dearly wanted to add. And I would say there's some things that I wanted to do, like a unicrapple Easter egg, a pink penguin, a crab. There's all these fun little Easter eggs that I could have put in, and also just little random props, doodads, plushies. I made a potato man, and I wanted to do a little game of, like, can you find all 5 hidden potato men? And that sort of thing. So there's like all these fun little projects that if I had more pieces, 1,000 more pieces, I could have done those. But they're not as important, and they're not key features like this is. So I think my point that I'm trying to make is I think I'd rather have this more detailed than have a bunch of little Easter eggs hidden around the park. So the sacrifice was worth it, in my opinion. And, we're losing out on a few Easter eggs as a result. But I just know that when you're building something intricate and then you duplicate it 6 times, it can add up really quickly, and maybe try to block out a cheap one before making the detailed one so that you have options. You can go, hey, I'll go use that cheaper one now that I feel like I need the pieces. I didn't have that option in the end because I committed to this. And what I'll show you is we actually animate it, we move it, and we do something cool with it based off of a YouTube creator named Taggy. We use Taggy movers using their oscillation rotator trick. Spoiler alert, there's some of my build. And we get these things functioning. So I'll show off that and some of the components and how it looks. And then from there, we'll save the rest of what you kind of saw, just a little bits of for the next build and the next builds. But we're pretty much at the end of it. I'm just filling up the tanks with some different various plants, trying to mix it up a little bit, put some potato plants in some of them, put some flowers in another one. This is where I made my potatoes. So we got some potatoes to put in there. Pretty fun. But yeah, that's we're down to the last 20 seconds of footage. So what we're gonna do is hop over to game, and we're gonna show you the 3 different hydroponic tanks in their full glory and somewhat in their scenes without spoiling too much. And then fun little bonus episode here, but you'll see why they're key components in just a second. So let's head over to game and show you guys what I've done with these tanks. All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Here we are. Shout out to Taggy. Their oscillator rotator system is insane. If you haven't seen their video on it, check out Taggy Movers. He's a YouTuber, Tagi. And yeah, basically you can change the length of something coming out based off the length of this blue one in the middle. And if I want this door to come out further, I just move this blue one out further. What the center point for my door is, and it'll move out twice that length from the blue one. And as you can see here, it freaking works. And all we need from there is a sound effect. So we got these all made. Like I said, they're integral parts. Let me show you why and how. So I don't want to show off too much of the build, but we are here in the build itself. And you can see now they have sound effects. All the ones that are closed have a button to be opened. And all the ones that are open just stay open. I could make them close, but I don't want that. So I wanted to have a few that are open. And as you can see, it takes up a big portion. I don't want to show you the whole room. We're going to save that for a future video, but I'll tell you right now that this is probably, you know, other than the open space in the middle of the room, this is a good portion of the Hydroponics Lab. It is a feature wall. It's a feature focal point. So it was probably worth the effort. Let's show you some of the tanks as well. So these are some of the tanks. Again, another feature piece in the somewhat center of the room, which take up a good portion of it. And they have the water tanks, the pipes leading into them. So it all makes sense. And it is a very standout core component. So knowing how big they were going to be and how many I could fit in, building them in advance really helped me build around that or plan around that. Here's a couple more of the tanks here, kind of against the feature wall. Again, like knowing how many they are and how much space they're going to take up was pretty important. So yeah, that's a look at them in game, in their location, without revealing too much of the room. But you can see that this whole room is basically filled up with hydroponics now, and knowing the size and having them pre-built really helped me when it came to the next phase, which you'll see tomorrow, is blocking out the rest of the build and actually getting them in place. So there you guys have it. Some fun sequencers, some fun movers, and some fun hydroponics. Not as interesting as the other videos, but hopefully you guys found it somewhat fun. This is going to be a core component to everything else that we're going to see come after it. So we'll see you guys at tomorrow's build where we build the rest of the building, and then one final video to decorate it all. It's going to be pretty awesome. So whipping through what would be a 100-hour build almost in just 5 episodes is pretty nuts. So hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you thought down in the comments below, and we'll see you in tomorrow's video. Bye now.